Gost Radija Slobodna Evropa je Matthew Palmer, specijalni izaslanik Sjedinjenih Američkih država za izbornu reformu u Bosni i Hercegovini. Mr. Palmer, you said when you were in Sarajevo in October that when it comes to electoral reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina, that it's necessary to find a balance of interest of different actors so the rulings of the court in Strasbourg can be met, according to the mantra, one country, two entities, and three peoples. How do you find a balance when you have totally opposed views of the parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina? Or opinions have changed? Only public has no notion of that.
Thanks for the question, and thanks, of course, for having me on the show. I don't think it's accurate to describe the positions of the parties, the stakeholders in Bosnia-Herzegovina as being fundamentally opposed. I think there are some points of agreement, points of commonality that are important and that we need to recognize. I think that all of the stakeholders support the European aspirations for Bosnia-Herzegovina, Bosnia's European future and European integration. I think all of the parties would like a system, a state system in Bosnia-Herzegovina that is functional, one that produces goods and services for the citizenry of Bosnia-Herzegovina, one that helps create political stability, one that supports economic growth, one that supports jobs, ones that ensures that young people in Bosnia-Herzegovina feel that they can make their homes in Bosnia-Herzegovina, build their families in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and have a future that is secure and prosperous. So on that basis, we're working with the parties to identify a path forward that supports an electoral system that is more transparent, fairer, more accountable, to support changes to the constitution, limited, targeted changes that will help Bosnia-Herzegovina meet its obligations to the European Union and open up the European path for BiH.
But as you said, the wishes are one, and what we see on the field is another thing.
Listen, you know, this is difficult stuff. If this was easy stuff, it would have been done a long time ago. So what we're trying to do, our role, the role of the European Union, we're trying to help the parties reach agreements among themselves. What we would like to see is an agreement that has multiple dimensions to it, but one that promotes an electoral system that is fairer, more accountable, more transparent, and meets the needs and the obligations of the stakeholders. And that's a pretty broad, complex agenda, but it's one that I'm confident we can secure together collectively with goodwill and leadership on the part of those in Bosnia-Herzegovina who have been entrusted with that sacred responsibility to represent the public.
Based on your previous experiences, you are well aware of the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and yet how do you expect leaders to come up with a compromise if they couldn't do that for more than 25 years?
Listen, you know, everything in the Balkans looks like it's impossible until it's done, and then it looks in retrospect like it was inevitable. And I think we went through a very similar problem set with the Prespa agreement between North Macedonia and Greece. It's a long-standing challenge, a long-standing problem. They can't do it, and then they do it. I think we've seen repeatedly in Bosnia-Herzegovina over the years that when there is sufficient incentive, whether when the pressures reach a level where it's compelling to the leaders to find these compromises, they do. And as we look at the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it is of sufficient concern and sufficiently compelling to concentrate the minds of the leaders. And I am hopeful that they can come together, identify the points of commonality, and there are points of commonality, identify the points of differences, and I acknowledge that there are significant differences, and then work together on the compromises that are necessary to move the country forward. It's not easy, but it is absolutely doable. It's possible. And the leaders in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the political parties, the public in BiH will have the support, friendship, and the partnership of the United States, as well as the European Union, in pursuing those compromises.
The two sides of the negotiations, SDA and HDZ, perceive your intentions regarding the electoral process differently. Mr. Bakir Izetbegović said that he got the impression that the solution would harm Bosniak interests as well as pro-Bosnian parties, while Dragan Čović claims that the most important thing for him is legitimate representation in the House of Peoples and the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Is it possible for Čović and HDZ Bosnia and Herzegovina to get 2 constituencies in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina?
First of all, let me underscore that this is not a negotiation that has 2 parties, right? This is about all of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the future direction of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the integrity of the electoral process across the country. So there are going to be multiple stakeholders to this. One of the key aspects of the reform process, as we look at it, is limited, targeted constitutional change to help Bosnia and Herzegovina meet its obligations to the European Union and come into compliance with the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, including but not limited to the Sejdić-Finci ruling, which will be familiar, I think, to all of your viewers and listeners. So there are multiple stakeholders to this. When I go to Sarajevo, and I will be traveling to Sarajevo again tomorrow, we meet not just with SDA and HDZ BiH, but we meet with leaders of multiple political parties, including parties in opposition, including the opposition parties in Republika Srpska, as well as the Federation. We meet with civil society, we meet with opinion leaders, we meet with representatives of youth in BiH to talk through this as a whole of society challenge, not simply a discussion between SDA and HDZ BiH and a back and forth between Mr. Izetbegović and Mr. Čović. It's much more complicated than that. We have certainly paid attention to what it is that Dragan Čović and HDZ BiH have identified as their priorities and their red lines in this process. Equally, we have listened carefully to Mr. Izetbegović and representatives of the SDA as they laid out their position. We have also spoken to and listened to the concerns from other parties, DF, Mr. Nikšić, Mr. Radončić, Mr. Konaković, and others in this process, as well as with the parties in Republika Srpska. And it is difficult, but not impossible, to reconcile those competing interests and those competing red lines and find the necessary compromises. I cannot tell you exactly what that will look like because it's not up to me. It's up to the parties themselves to negotiate these compromises and reach an agreement with our support, with our help, with our encouragement, with our facilitation. But there's no particular plan that I'm going to put down on the table and say, this is the American plan and this is what we want you to come on board with. We're helping the parties work through their differences and reach an agreement that they can own and they can support, because it will be the parties and their representatives that have to raise their hand in Parliament and vote to effect the changes that we hope to see.
Are they even close?
I don't know that I would describe it in terms of how far away or how close they are, but I will say that there is, as I look at it, a shared understanding of what the issues are that need to be addressed and resolved. And again, I underscore that this is not easy stuff. This is difficult. It's hard to identify compromises that give all of the stakeholders enough of what they need in order to make this viable or possible for them. It's not impossible. And nothing is agreed in this process until everything is agreed. So I would anticipate negotiations, debates, discussions that will be hard fought. And the political leaders will fight their corners hard. It's what they do. We're there to encourage the process, to facilitate compromise, to help identify those areas where there are disagreements, differences that need to be bridged. I think it is doable. I think it is achievable. I think there is little time to waste. That if you work backwards from when the elections are planned in the fall, we really need to have all of this done and in place by spring, which means we have just a couple of months to work with. And I hope that time pressure will serve to concentrate the minds of the political leaders and persuade them of the importance of reaching these compromises quickly.
So you believe that the elections in 2022, given the events in Bosnia and Herzegovina, will perhaps go with the possibility of minorities to pass into presidency or even into House of Peoples?
It is certainly my hope and expectation that the next set of elections will be conducted under circumstances that are in compliance with the rulings of the European courts.
In this electoral reform, it seems that international community cares a lot to resolve the issues in Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. What will, on the other hand, be with the Republika Srpska and the candidates for the presidency and House of Peoples?
Well, I think that depending on the overall frame of what is agreed, I think there would be, a need to ensure that the process for election of the candidates from Republika Srpska to those institutions is equally compliant with the rulings of the European Courts of Human Rights. I think it's a lot easier to envision how that works in Republika Srpska in comparison to how it works in the Federation side of the House. There is nothing that we're looking at or we're advocating or we're contemplating that challenges in any way the fundamental mantra of Bosnia and Herzegovina as one country with two entities and three constituent peoples plus others. It's not too difficult to address that challenge with Republika Srpska. The Federation side of the equation is more difficult, but I'm confident that it can be worked out.
According to Mr. Escobar, the problem in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not ethnic, but systemic corruption and lack of credibility of political actors. That affects the ability that state institutions to function properly. Sanctions were at the table, as far as we know, but there is hesitation when it comes to using them. Does that affect the electoral reform as well? And will there finally be any sanctions for those actors?
I have nothing to add in terms of the sanctions questions of what it is that you've heard from Gabe Escobar. But in terms of the issues of corruption and the integrity of the state system, I think there is absolutely room in the context of electoral reform and the targeted constitutional reforms that would accompany it to promote and support a system, an electoral system, that addresses some of these concerns, which is that the structures, the institutions, work for the powerful and not for the powerless. And that what we can do through advancing the package of electoral reforms that has been put forward by the Central Electoral Commission is to support implementation of an electoral system, changes the electoral system that will advance an electoral process that is more transparent, that is more accountable, that offers a playing field that is leveler than it has been in the past, and that opens up space for political pluralism in Bosnia and Herzegovina that has been at times hard to find. So I am confident that these changes, these electoral reforms, consistent with the recommendations of the OSCE and Greco, will help advance a system, an electoral system, that contributes to the anti-corruption agenda as much as it contributes to democratic reform.
So, are you coming with some sort of optimism in Bosnia and Herzegovina? What is the basic thing that you're going to say to those actors and leaders of political parties when you come here on Monday?
Colin Powell taught me that optimism is a force multiplier. So I always approach these problems, no matter how difficult or how intractable, with the idea that this can be done, success is achievable, and that we need to put our shoulder to the wheel and push as hard as we can. I'm not saying success is guaranteed, but I am telling you that it's absolutely, totally possible. And I am committed, and the United States is committed, to doing everything that we can do to help secure that positive outcome. In terms of the message that I'm bringing to Sarajevo on this trip, and again, I'll be traveling together with the EEAS Managing Director, Angelina Eikors, and together the message that we will be bringing to the leaders of the various political parties and to others is now is the time for action. We've talked through this issue at length. Everybody understands the nature of the problems that we're looking at. Everybody understands the nature of the compromises that are necessary. And now is the time for leadership. Now is the time for difficult choices. Now is the time to stand up and advocate for the compromises that are necessary in order to help this country, in order to help Bosnia and Herzegovina move forward towards a European future, a more prosperous future, a stabler future, one that contributes to a brighter and more prosperous future for all the citizens of BiH. This is something that we want to see happen. Ideally, it's something that all of the political parties and their leaders want to see happen. And now is the time to make it so.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me on the show today. I really do appreciate this opportunity to talk through this important and difficult issue set.